What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Financially Free Era podcast with me, Megan, your host from SLP Wealth. And today I have Kathleen with me, Kathleen Boyd. She is one of our SLP Wealth financial planners on the team. She's a certified financial planner professional. And welcome, Kathleen. I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit more. I don't want to be the one to do it. You can
No
do it
problem.
yourself.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. My name is Kathleen. Yep. I'm a financial planner on the team here at SOP Wealth, also a consultant over at Student Loan Planner, and really excited for this topic we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, Kathleen really brings a lot of education to, I think, her financial planning style, which I love because financial planning can sometimes be a very overwhelming topic, or finance in general can be a very overwhelming topic for folks. And you teach financial planning at Oklahoma State, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so very cool. So I'm gonna maybe get schooled today, and we're gonna talk about this or that. We're gonna play kind of a game. This or that. What do we prioritize when we're comparing two different goals? And the premise to this is a lot of times folks will accidentally maybe put the cart before the horse. I think a lot of folks know that saying. They'll, prioritize maybe the wrong goal or the wrong step to take first when maybe there were some crucial foundational things to do first. And this isn't always exactly the advice you should take, right? Because financial planning, it we love that word, it depends, right? How many times do you say that, Kathleen, in a day?
A gazillion.
Yeah, because the answer for somebody's personal financial planning needs, it depends. It depends on a lot of things, your goals, our timelines, your priorities, your current situation, and what you're trying to work towards. So these, I think, are generally the right way to think about a this or that conversation, like what you should generally be prioritizing. But we'll probably run into some scenarios where we could argue both ways. Like maybe one way is better to start with versus the other. Or there could be scenarios that make that way better than the other. So we'll get into it. I think it'll be a good conversation, a good, healthy, friendly debate, if you'll call
Yeah.
it
Yes.
that.
Let's do it.
So, all right. So I think that lays the groundwork, and let's start. I'm gonna quiz Kathleen, and I'll bring up a this or that scenario, and then we'll dive into like why is that generally the direction we need to go.
Okay.
So, and these are questions I think we get a lot too. So these aren't just like things that we came up with. We get a lot of questions about, or a lot of people who will have goals that is essentially like putting the cart before the horse sometimes because they're excited about something. So this first one
Mhm.
is a great example where someone, maybe got their first job, they're making good income, they're getting organized with their budget, and they are so excited to start investing. They've heard like investing is super great for their future. They're young, they're early on in their career. They've heard it's the best thing to do. So they want to jump into investing. So should we be doing that, or should we be looking at our emergency fund first? What do you
Yeah.
think,
So
Kathleen?
So I'm of the position that the emergency fund should always be prioritized first above investing. And the reason for that is everybody needs liquidity. I don't care how much money you make, what your net worth is. Everybody needs cash. The saying goes, cash is king.
Mm-hmm.
And that is absolutely true. Having that liquidity in place is designed to give you financial security and peace of mind. If an emergency comes up or an unexpected expense comes up, you're not dipping into investments, particularly when there were market downturns. So you're losing money. And then you're also recognizing taxes when you're dipping into investments. Instead, you have cash and ideally in a liquid savings account, whether it's a traditional savings or a high yield savings account that you can tap first. Having this emergency savings also helps avoid what I call bad debt. So, using credit cards to cover unexpected expenses. You're less likely to have to do that if you have the cash on hand to deal with those unexpected curveballs that life tends to throw at us.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. I think emergency savings is the line of defense that you have
Mhm.
against accumulating debt. And it can happen fast. It can happen really fast going into debt. So it is, emergency savings, it is more boring. So you could say, because it's not
Mhm.
fluctuating with the market, but that's exactly what it's for. It should be there to be your security blanket for when things change. And yeah, I think the taxability, like you were talking about, like pulling money out of an investment at the right or the wrong time is going to generate some tax consequences too. So not only are you taking money out of your positions and maybe sacrificing what that longer term, like the opportunity cost of that longer term investment looks like, but we may also generate some kind of tax implication for that. And it's just better, I think, to have the emergency fund sitting in savings, a high yield savings account, hopefully getting like some pretty good interest on it to be that buffer before having to run to credit cards or other investment accounts.
Yep,
So
absolutely.
great. I think we're in the same page there. So emergency fund before investing. All right, next up, let's still talk about investing. I think because that is a really exciting topic. And so folks get really jazzed about getting started with investing when they're getting started with their financial planning journey, which is great.
Mhm.
So let's compare this or that. Should we be taking advantage of our employer 401k match, or should we use that money for what it would take to get up to the match and use it in other accounts, like a brokerage account, for example? This or
Absolutely
that?
not.
Yeah.
You should
Tell us
definitely,
why.
yeah, you should definitely prioritize the matches. Now, you most commonly hear that, this is free money that you're leaving on the table. I actually don't perceive it that way. This is not free money. This is money that you are entitled to as an
Hmm.
employee for the work that you're doing.
Hmm.
So you're leaving that on the table if you don't maximize that match. So definitely that should be priority over investing in a brokerage account is, getting that 100% return on your money.
Hmm. Yep. And it can be considered like your comp too. That's part of your
Right.
compensation
Exactly.
is having access to that match. And so to break that down a little further, like a lot of employers will offer some kind of match where if you contribute a certain percentage to your 401k plan or 403b or TSP or something, they will contribute a certain percentage. And they outline this in the employer benefit package that they give you. So that should give you an idea of exactly how that works. But taking advantage of that, I think, is really important because it is money that's going to be going towards your retirement and it is available to you as part of your compensation package.
Yeah.
So that's certainly something to look into before using other accounts. I know other accounts can sound fun and, like opening up a brokerage account and starting to pick and choose stocks or something. That can sound a little more fun, but I think definitely the foundational piece before that step would be taking advantage of your employer match.
Yeah. And you mentioned before the basics are boring. They absolutely are.
Mm-hmm.
Emergency funds, matching, it doesn't sound as exciting as crypto or
Right.
hedge funds or but getting the foundations nailed down first is so important to get to that next step of doing more complex strategies and investings. We need to make sure we have the foundations down first.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Agreed. Agreed. All right. So that's a this or that scenario where employer 401k match or 403b match, whatever type of employer account you have, would come before putting money in other types of investment accounts.
Yes. And Megan, before you move on, but I would also add to that our employee stock purchase plans.
Ooh, yeah. Let's
Um,
talk
so
about that for a second.
Yeah, so some of you might work for corporations that allow you to buy company stock at a discount, like, RSUs, restricted stock units, other stock options and such. And I think that is also a similar priority on the same level as the matching, because often what happens with those shares is that when they vest, there is an immediate tax impact, but you might be able to mitigate against that tax impact if you can use those proceeds to then fund tax efficient vehicles like your 401k or HSA and such. So I
Hmm.
would put that on the same level as the employer match, any kind of stock purchase plan you have access to.
Hmm. These are fun, I think. Well, maybe we think they're fun to talk about the employee stock purchase plans. They can seem complicated at first, especially because there's a lot of like terms that you may not have heard before, like vesting and grant price or I don't know if strike price necessarily is in that lingo, but there's a lot of different things and timelines that are associated with these employee stock purchase plans.
Hmm.
Um, and the other part of it is having access to this, it is a benefit. It is part of your compensation as well. But it also makes you very concentrated in your employer from like a diversification perspective. Meaning, if you have, 100 shares issued to you in your company's stock, for example, you not only have those 100 shares now part of your compensation, which is now something that you have access to that you can liquidate in the future or use in the future or leave in the future. That's another option. You can leave it in
Yeah.
that stock. But you're also employed by the company, right? So you're putting a lot of kind of eggs in one basket in that
Right.
way
Yeah.
because you're employed by them and you have their stock. So you're very tied to the success of this company, right? Is that how you see it too?
Exactly. Yes, I do.
Yeah. So there's a lot of times, like this is just kind of going on a continued tangent on this or that scenario. But a lot of times we will talk about diversifying, these benefits that you may have at your employer when the time is right, diversification to minimize how many eggs you have in your employer's basket, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Let's get into comparing maybe some debt scenarios with investing. So, still along the same lines, talking investing. Let's say a client has unexpectedly a lot of credit card debt. Maybe they had, an emergency or they were out of work for a couple months and they had to put some months of expenses on their credit cards. And those credit cards are at maybe 20, 25%.
Yeah.
Should we prioritize those or should we go and invest and build our wealth?
Yeah, I'm of the camp that you should prioritize that high interest debt first. To me, it just does not make sense to be primarily focused on investing when you have high interest rate debt. And I'm thinking particularly like credit card debt, not talking student loans,
Hmm.
but credit card debt where the interest rate is 20, 30%.
Hmm.
When you invest, it is very difficult to get a return of 20 or 30%.
Yeah,
So,
it can
you
happen some
know,
years, but not all the time. It's definitely not
exactly,
going to
not on
happen
a
all the time.
consistent annual basis.
Yeah.
So investing while having high interest rate debt is really counterintuitive to
Hmm.
building wealth. And I like to liken it to trying to fill a bucket with holes in it, or, trying to navigate a boat that has holes.
Hmm.
Um, you're going down with the Titanic if you have high interest rate debt because it's just, it's very unlikely you're going to get a return that's going to outpace that
Yeah.
high interest rate debt. So my rule of thumb for clients is if your interest rate on your debt is 6% or greater, you should generally consider paying down that debt first before investing additional dollars.
Hmm. Gotcha. Yeah, and I think I'm definitely on that same bank, bank of the sides. It's hard to catch up with what credit cards charge and interest. Um,
Hmm.
and personal loans, you may have a personal loan that's not awesome either. You might have one that's 10, 11, 12%, and that's still in that camp where it's high interest and we can't consistently feel good about like investing and getting 10, 11, 12%. Maybe we do in certain points of time, but maybe not consistently. So it's worth pivoting to focus on paying off the higher interest debt first. Take that step, take that one step back, right? Because that might be what it feels
Hmm.
like for folks is like focusing on something that's not growing your wealth, but in actuality it is because it's going to help your net worth. It's going to help you take two steps forward next, like when we have
Yeah,
the debt taken care of, right?
yeah, yeah.
So that's the right way to go about it. I think my percentages are about the same. Like I think I tell folks like between 5 and 7% is kind of gray area and that's a
Okay.
lot of times where student loans fall,
Hmm. Yeah.
where it's kind of gray area. So it depends on the goals that we have with our student loans on if we should prioritize them or not before investing more. But yeah, showstopper, if it's 7% or more for me, we're focusing on the debt as far as like if the debt is 7% or more.
Yeah.
If it's less than that, I have a lot of folks that have like really inexpensive car loans or trying to think. I think I had somebody the other day say they had a 2.6% auto loan and the balance was getting lower and we were talking about, does it make sense to just kind of wipe it out? But she also had student loans that have a slightly higher interest rate, kind of in that gray area range. And she's a payoff case for the student loans. And so we decided it's not going to make sense to pay off the car when we have a higher interest debt that we can focus on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's playing the interest rate game here a little bit, comparing the
Hmm.
interest rates and the benefits to what we can reap from focusing on one or the other, right?
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense to me.
So, all right. Well, so far, you've been telling me not to invest. I've got to take care of all these other things. Well, I guess employer match is investing, but
Yes.
let's go into two investing topics, which technically they are both investing topics. So, this or that, contributing to a sorry, contributing to an HSA, a health savings account, or
Hmm.
contributing to a Roth IRA, this or that. Which one first?
Yeah. So I'm going to go with the HSA.
Mm-hmm.
And we did record a podcast episode on this not too long ago about
We did.
HSA planning. Highly recommend folks check that out if
It
you
was a
haven't
good one.
already.
Yeah. Go check that one out for sure.
Uh-huh. And I mentioned I believe HSAs are the best kind of savings slash investment account you can have.
Hmm.
It is considered the gold standard of tax advantage accounts because of the triple tax benefits associated with them. You can contribute to the HSA on a tax deductible basis. So that's going to lower your AGI, your adjusted gross income, which can be beneficial not just for tax purposes, but for student loans. If you're on an income driven payment plan, you can invest the money inside of the HSA and have that growing tax deferred.
Hmm.
And you can take the money out tax free for qualified medical expenses as defined by the IRS.
Hmm.
And this is why this type of account overrides the Roth IRA, because Roth IRA, you're not getting a tax deduction for the contributions. The money that is going inside that account has already been taxed.
Hmm. Yeah.
Though it does have other benefits, including you can invest the money inside the Roth, have that growing tax deferred, and then you can pull the money out at some point in the future tax free. So there's a kind of two-prong tax advantage with Roths, but there's a
Hmm.
three-prong tax advantage with HSAs, and that's why I believe HSAs outweigh the Roth IRA.
Hmm. Yeah. Makes total sense to me. And we love Roth IRAs. And for those that don't have access to an HSA, Roth
Mhm.
IRA it is a really great bucket to be contributing to. So we're definitely not scoffing at
Right,
Roth IRAs.
right,
But
not
if
at
we have
all.
access, yeah, to an HSA, these are the things we're thinking about, like when we're comparing, like where should money go, is where's the list of pros and cons and which has the longer list for pros, you know?
Yeah.
So, and yeah, we nerded out hard on the HSA episode about how to really maximize it and juice it for all we can. So definitely go check out that episode.
Yes, for sure.
Awesome. Okay. All right. So, sticking with investing, since it's the fun topic,
Hmm.
this or that, should we be putting more money into your 401k beyond the match? So, we talked about the 401k match. Should we be putting more money in that, or should we be maximizing a Roth IRA or a backdoor Roth?
So I find this question is a lot more controversial and not as straightforward
Mm-hmm.
as the other questions. I know some people are of the camp that they should be focused on the Roth and that should
Mm-hmm.
be prioritized or the backdoor Roth process. I'm of the camp that I think the employer plan should be maxed out first
Mm-hmm.
before maxing out Roth IRAs or backdoor Roth IRAs, with the exception of if you have if the investment options are terrible in the
Yeah.
401k or employer plan. And the reason for that is it's those contributions are keeping your AGI low. So it's ideal, particularly if you have student loans or on an income driven payment plan, keeping that AGI is really key to keeping your payment down. And Roth IRA is not going to help you keep that AGI down. And then,
Hmm.
secondly, what is often undervalued is the creditor protection
Hmm.
associated with the 401k plan. If you ever lost a lawsuit or you were, part of bankruptcy proceedings, the courts can raid your IRA accounts by law.
Hmm.
They are
Hmm.
not allowed to raid your employer sponsored accounts.
Hmm.
So that's what makes me lean towards maxing out the employer plans first before the Roth IRA. But I'm hoping to open
Hmm.
to hearing other thoughts.
Yeah, I think this is definitely one where the word depends comes into play. I wish we had like a little depends song, like it depends. But this is one of those where I could argue both ways, and it does definitely come down to a few different things. I think what you said about the pre-tax deduction is so true. We work with a lot of folks who have student loans, and we're pursuing loan forgiveness with those student loans. And so the lower the AGI is, the adjusted gross income is for the year, the better, because that means a lower student loan payment. And a 401k is like the biggest pre-tax bucket we have that we could play around with to reduce the AGI. So
Hmm.
a lot of times we're leaning towards that for our student loan borrowers pursuing forgiveness, PSLF or longer term forgiveness, because it affects so many other areas of their plan. And student loans are
Yeah.
oftentimes a big area of their student loan or of their financial plan, I mean. So I totally agree with you there. And then also the protections with bankruptcy, having the 401k being a little more protected is something to keep in mind, if the worst were to happen.
Hmm.
I think you brought up exactly what I was thinking because I've had a few scenarios in my planning career where the 401k plan, because the 401k plan, the investment options that you have access to, the employer has approved and basically picked for you. So you have a laundry list of a limited amount of funds that you can invest in.
Hmm.
You can't go outside that list because the custodian is who's managing that 401k, the custodian that your employer hired, and they have a defined plan built for their employees. So I've seen circumstances where the employer plan was very expensive. They had pretty expensive funds within them. Not
Yeah.
that is completely wrong. Like I'm sure they had reasonings for why they chose those funds. But comparing to other options just out there on the open market, they were a lot more expensive comparing the two. And so we have
Yeah.
had scenarios where I do lean more towards the Roth IRA or an individual account because we have more control over those investment options, thus the investment expenses. And
Mm.
this one case I'm thinking about in particular was somebody who was not planning on staying with this employer for a long time. And they were also not someone going towards PSLF. And they were okay with the thought process of, getting the match because that was part of their benefits package, like we've talked about,
Yeah.
but redirecting up to the 7,000, what we contribute to a Roth IRA, redirecting some of the rest of that money over to something that she had more control over for the investment options and the investment costs for. Because it was pretty significant at the end of the day when we were looking at the costs. So that was one scenario, and that's totally one of those. It depends. Like that's not going to be relevant to everyone because a lot of times we do see pretty inexpensive fund options like target date funds or target date index funds, those kinds of things that are very low expense ratios, and maybe there's not a large account fee or anything. So that's
Yeah.
where I would advocate for that client, like what is the list of pros and cons? And okay, well the pros are outweighing the the pros on the 401k side of things in this scenario. But that's maybe one argument, which I think you already
Yeah.
even, you alluded to that in the beginning. So,
Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense. And for clients that are finding themselves in that situation where the investment options are just terrible with their 401k or employer sponsored plan, might be worth looking into the plan document and seeing if there's a what we call a self-directed brokerage option, because that
Mm.
could create
Hmm.
another pathway into to getting more to getting access to more lower cost funds as well.
Hmm. Yep. And if the employer is not like a massive corporation, if it's a smaller entity, smaller 401k plan, maybe it's worth like bringing up to your employer to an extent. Like if you feel comfortable doing that, because the employer would have more say on what custodian they're using or what kind of service they're using. That if they saw what you're seeing or what you're feeling, like maybe that's something that they'd take into consideration.
Absolutely. I tell clients all the time, self-advocacy is so important in
Mm-hmm.
financial planning. Hmm.
Yes. Yeah. All right, awesome. So, still investing. I've got a this or that. And I think this will start a good conversation too. So, this or that. Should we be maxing our 401k contributions? Kind of staying on this same thought process with 401ks or employer sponsored plans. Should we
Hmm.
max our 401k contributions or should we invest more in a taxable brokerage account if we're comparing where money should go?
Okay.
Maximize or other investment account?
So I think this is another one of those it depends
It
kind of
depends.
questions. I would say for the most part, likely yes, maxing the 401k contribution should take precedence
Hmm.
over the brokerage account, with maybe the exception being, we have some clients who have FIRE goals.
Hmm.
For those that don't know what FIRE is, that is a acronym for Financial Independence, Retire Early.
Hmm.
And the challenge with those 401k plans or employer sponsored plans is you're not allowed to pull money out before age 59 and a half, with the exception of 457 plans.
Hmm.
So if it's really important to you to retire, be financially independent before age 59 and a half, maybe we split our contributions between 401k and brokerage, or maybe we
Hmm.
prioritize more of the brokerage over the 401k.
Hmm.
So it depends
It
on the
does.
client
Yeah.
situation. Yeah.
It does depend. Yeah. And I actually ran into a scenario last week with a client of mine where she's been crushing it. She's been maxing out her 401k, doing backdoor Roths, putting a lot into her brokerage account. She's been really setting herself up nicely. And she is someone that loves work. So she doesn't plan on retiring early, at least as
Hmm.
far as she knows right now. She probably will work until she is not like able to health wise or wants to slow down a little bit more. But her projections, when we're running retirement projections, are showing that she's going to have a lot of money in that 401k account, the pre tax bucket. And the problem with that, because that sounds great, right? The
Yeah.
problem with having a ton of money in this pre tax bucket when you're not planning on retiring super early. Maybe you have a smaller like window where you'll be 100% living off of your savings, right? From like, 70 to 90 or whatever your life expectancy is. But RMDs come into the equation,
Yeah.
required minimum distributions. And so we had a conversation last week literally about maybe it makes sense to slow down our pre-tax contributions because we're kind of overfunded on the pre-tax bucket where we're going to have those required minimum distributions, whether we like it or not, in our retirement years. And 70, is it 72 right now for when we have?
73.
There we go, 73. I was gonna say, I
73.
know it
Yeah.
changed recently.
Hmm.
So those, this is something to know about. This is part of your retirement planning as well, is pre-tax accounts, they've never been taxed, right? It was
Hmm.
something that you avoided paying taxes on when you put the money into that account. And it's growing tax free. You're not paying taxes on it every year or anything like that. So when you take the money out, that's when we're paying taxes on it. And when you get to 73, the IRS is saying, hey, you haven't paid taxes. We want some tax money now on this money that
Hmm.
you've saved. They're like, looking at the clock, like, can you please retire now so you could take money out?
Yeah, they want their piece of the pie,
Right.
for
So
sure.
they force it with these required minimum distributions. And there's a table to calculate exactly how much you'd have to start distributing from these accounts. And there's some rules too, like if you're still working or whatever the situation, there's some like technicalities, of course, with this, but there might become a time too where you're having to take a ton out in those pre-tax distributions in the future because you have to, not because you want to, which may not be a super efficient use of or not use of the funds necessarily. Well, maybe, maybe you're not going to spend it all, but may not be the most efficient distribution strategy overall. So there's some of that planning.
Absolutely. And not
Yeah.
only that, you're incurring taxes, but that impacts Medicare premiums too, because
Yes.
the premiums you pay are based off your income. So you could be inadvertently increasing your Medicare premiums
Hmm.
the more money that is distributed from those 401ks. This is why tax diversification is
Hmm.
so incredibly important and should be part of your financial planning strategy.
Hmm. Yep. And one quick fix to this too, like a lot, I think most employers now offer a Roth 401k option. So that could be something to consider too. Like if we're like
Mm-hmm.
way overfunded, or, I don't know if there's a such thing as overfunded, but if we're just way more like our bucket for pre-tax contributions is so much larger, or pre-tax accounts, I mean, is so much larger than any other tax bucket, then maybe it could make sense to consider the Roth 401k if there aren't other things kind of tied to that, like our student loan plan. So, of course, this comes into play with planning. But this is kind of the beauty of things. Like, there's not like one set answer for everything, there's
Yeah.
something we can massage and make completely fit your situation, which is very
Mm-hmm.
nice and beautiful about financial planning.
Yeah, that we don't live in a world of absolutes, that's for sure.
Yes. Yeah. I don't think we can ever really say definitely or guaranteed. Like it's very hard for us to
Mhm.
use those words in this profession. But
Yeah.
that I think is a positive
Yes,
because
indeed.
don't want to be
Indeed.
backed into a corner. So, okay. Let's pivot a little bit to still investing, but bringing kids into the picture. We get this
Hmm.
question actually a lot because saving for college is an important goal for parents. So this or that, contributing to a 529, which is a college savings plan, if saving for kiddos. Should we do that? This, which is the 529, or prioritize general investing first? What is the right play?
Okay, so we say general investing, we mean just for any goal as opposed to investing specifically for college?
Let's say yes. So this could be a
Okay.
point of clarification that we'd want to know from our
Hmm.
clients, right?
Yeah.
So maybe let's start with like just general investing for your own retirement. And then we could talk a little bit
Mm,
about like using a general investing account instead of a 529.
yeah. Um, so I'd really want to have a conversation with the client about what their goals really are, what's most important to them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the general investing, is this for retirement savings purposes? You know, is that a priority for you right now? Is this a bigger priority than college savings?
Mm-hmm.
More often than not, it likely is. Like, I encourage clients not to sacrifice their retirement savings to help their kids, pay for college.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so this is a tricky question. I will say,
Mm-hmm.
if you're investing particularly to help your kids save for college, you definitely want to consider the 529 plan, particularly if you live in a state that offers you a state tax deduction.
Mm-hmm.
It's just better to maximize the tax benefits that go along with that. However, I have worked with clients in the past at other firms where the strategy was maybe to split the investments between the 529 plan and the brokerage as a way to mitigate the risk of quote unquote overfunding the
Mm-hmm.
529 plan, potentially, looking at the 529 plan as this is what we're going to use to save for the kids' tuition, and the brokerage account is what we'll use to save towards room and board.
Mm-hmm.
And that way you're mitigating your risk of potentially quote unquote overfunding it.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
But
that would be a
interested in
great
hearing your
problem to
thoughts.
have.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we talk about overfunding and like having too much money in retirement for RMDs and stuff. Like these are great
Yeah.
problems to have. Don't get
Oh,
me
yeah.
wrong.
Oh, yeah. But they can come with tax penalties,
Yeah.
particularly if the 529 plan, if the kid does not go to college, or maybe they go to a cheaper school and you just have a lot of money left over.
Hmm.
You want to pull out. If it's not for qualified education expenses, you will be hit with tax penalties. So,
Hmm.
something to keep in mind there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I agree. I think lots of questions would be asked. I sometimes joke that like a client will ask us one question and we're going to fire back, four or five after that before we answer.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And, I think this is one that definitely is it depends. It depends, right?
Yeah.
So and it is because and the saying is you can borrow for college, but you cannot borrow for your retirement. And a
Mm,
lot of parents, they don't, like a big goal for them is to be financially independent from their children. Like they don't want to rely on their children to house them in the future or have
yeah.
to pay for their health care or things like that. And so I do think prioritizing your retirement, making sure your retirement is on track is a good priority. And it's not selfish. I think it's actually selfless in a sense
Hmm.
because it's protecting your kids in the future so they can focus on their own finances and their own kids one day and not mom and dad expenses.
Yeah, it's like the saying on the plane where the flight attendant at the beginning goes through all of the instructions and she tells
Mm-hmm.
people to make sure you put the mask on yourself before you
Yeah.
put it on your child. And so I think that's
Mm-hmm.
a really great analogy as it relates to financial planning and retirement planning, taking care of ourselves first
Mm-hmm.
from a retirement savings perspective before we come up with a game plan for college savings.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
think is a really smart approach.
Yeah, I think so too. And yeah, the 529 bucket, I think it is a great bucket to utilize for some of the tax benefits because that money grows tax deferred and it's tax free if used for
Mhm.
qualified education expenses. And they've come out with a few other things that you can do if you've overfunded the 529.
Yeah.
You can roll money into a Roth IRA now for the kiddo, which is great. That's a great option if there's some extra money left in there.
Hmm.
You have always been able to transfer the 529 to another immediate family member, another kid, for example. So that could be good to consider if there's some overfunding in the 529. So some options there. 529s, I wouldn't stress too much about feeling like it's so limited. It's not necessarily so limited. It's just,
Hmm.
yeah, the overfunding is something we want to be careful about so we don't have to pay unnecessary taxes, is all it is.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Indeed.
So, okay. Ooh, this next one I think is a really good one because we get this question all the time as well. Okay, so this or that. Should we contribute more to our brokerage accounts, like our taxable accounts? Let's pretend like retirement's on track. We've got some extra
Hmm.
funds we want to put somewhere. Should we be putting this towards our brokerage account or make extra mortgage payments?
Hmm. Another,
What do you
it
think?
depends. So what is the what is the interest rate on that mortgage? It all
Mm-hmm.
goes back to the earlier conversation about prioritizing debt versus savings.
Mm-hmm.
Can the return that we get from investing in the brokerage account, does it outpace the interest we're paying on the mortgage debt?
Mm-hmm.
If it does, then it likely makes more sense to just draw that debt out for longer and just
Mm-hmm.
stick with the current term, whether it's 15, 30-year term mortgage, and continue wrapping up the brokerage savings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because the brokerage investing long term, like the return on investment, could outpace that lower mortgage payment. Or sorry, not
Hmm.
mortgage payment, but mortgage interest rate.
Correct.
So it is a bit of a math equation there. And I do like to say too that a lot of times financial decisions, like of course there's the math answer, but there's
Hmm.
also the behavior answer.
Yeah.
So I have had scenarios where it made sense where like mathematically to pay the more or sorry to contribute more to a brokerage account invest more, it made more sense to do that looking at the math, But emotionally, behaviorally, lifestyle wise, the decision was made to prioritize the mortgage, to knock the mortgage out.
Mm,
And that's something that can happen in financial planning. We can choose to make a behavioral decision. Like as long as you know all the pros and cons,
right.
and it will make you sleep better at night to be done with the mortgage in 5 years versus 25. There's going to be some cons to that, right? Like we're kind of missing out on that 5 year window. The opportunity cost of what we could have been doing with those extra savings is lost. But if we're all on the same page and okay with that, go for it. We can make the behavioral decision. So it doesn't always have to be the math answer. And that's totally it's a depends answer too.
Definitely. As you're coming to that decision, though, one of the key things you want to think about is liquidity.
Yeah.
Real
Hmm.
estate in general is a very illiquid asset, and having a lot of your wealth tied up in equity can get difficult, particularly if you reach a point where you need some cash or
Hmm.
liquidity that investments can provide, but you don't have it because most of your wealth is tied up in this non-liquid asset. We
Hmm.
just want to be careful of that
Yeah.
as
Yeah, that's
well.
totally one of the cons to talk through.
Hmm.
But if you're someone who's like super conservative in the sense of like great emergency savings, has liquid funds, maybe in a brokerage account, already, is super secure in their job, super secure in their kind of retirement numbers, maybe that would have already been crunched. Like, I think it could be, it's fun to walk through those scenarios with folks. So this
Yeah.
is definitely what working with the planner is all about, is like designing a plan that is literally going to fit your life and make sense to you, because that's what matters. It doesn't matter if
Hmm.
it makes sense mathematically on paper. It needs to make sense
Hmm.
to you.
Yeah,
So,
certainly. Certainly well said.
well, good. Well, I think that wraps up some of the big common this or that scenarios. Thank you for singing the It Depends song with me every so often and kind of debating like some of the things that we commonly talk to clients about. And hopefully this helps kind of paint the picture for questions that you might have yourself as you're prioritizing things in your own financial plan. And of course, we're here if you need some help. Yeah, Kathleen is one of our awesome financial planners on the team. She'll be back for more podcast episodes in the future to educate us on these topics and push us forward. But any closing words before we shut it down?
Yeah, I don't think so.
All
Thank you
right.
for having me on.
Well, thanks for coming back, Kathleen. Always appreciate it. And I hope everybody has a lovely weekend coming up, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Are you ready to unlock financial freedom faster with SLP Wealth? Get high quality, affordable, student loan aware financial planning and get the best deal for it anywhere that you're going to find working with your own dedicated SLP Wealth financial planner that is able to give you the best integrated advice across financial planning, investments, and tax, along with all the student loan hacks that you need and that impact all other areas of your financial planning. The deal you're going to find here is special just for podcast listeners. If you go to promo.slpwealth.com, you can sign up with a great discount off your first month. That's promo.slpwealth.com.